for today, we're going to be looking at Module 4, which deals with managing conflict. Now, we all know that conflict is inevitable, regardless if it's personal or professional, it's going to come up at some point. How we actually deal with the conflict is very important. It's actually key. If you allow conflict to last too long within a team, it can actually fester and can cause many problems for you. So it's really important that you actually address conflict as soon as it arises. Conflict really occurs when what you want and what your beliefs and needs are incompatible with what somebody else wants and believes. That's where you have that disparity. So it's really important that you actually address that as soon as you possibly can. So for today's module, we're going to review a couple of things. By the end of the module, you're actually going to be able to define conflict, and then you're going to be able to guide your team through a conflict situation based on their preferred style. As you may recall from our previous modules, especially in the communications where we started to introduce DISC and how that works really well in terms of assessing people's personalities. As I remind you that it's not to pigeonhole any personality, it's just to give you an overall idea of how that person communicates. So let's go through what those four are. What is D? Does anybody remember what D stands for?
Dominance.
Yes, dominance. What does I stand for?
Influence.
Influence, excellent. What about C?
Conscientiousness.
See, I tried to show you a little bit there. Conscientiousness. And then S?
Steadiness.
Steadiness, that is correct. So those four basically put together is your DISC profile. Everybody has all four of those different profiles. However, they will usually have one that tends to be a little bit more dominant than the other four. Again, this is not to pigeonhole anybody, it is just to have a general idea of how they approach situations. When you layer the four different profiles, personality styles, with the Thomas Kilmann method, as some of you may recall, that's where you can start seeing how people will start to approach conflict. With regards to the Thomas Kilmann instrument, I know some of you may have heard of this before, you've got 5 different ways of approaching conflict. Compete, collaborate, compromise, avoid, and accommodate. So these are the 5 different methods. Depending on your personality style, you tend to move towards one of these 5 boxes. The first one is with compete. So you've got compete is where you tend to be more of the D personality style, where you tend to be a little bit more demanding when you are in a conflict. That's where you're going to want to go and win-win. I'm going to win, you're going to lose. Whereas opposed to the I's, which are more influencers, they're more expressive, they want to talk about the feelings, they want to have a win-win. Let's collaborate, let's talk, and I want to know what you need, and you need to know what I need, and perhaps we'll come up with a win-win solution. Your S's, they tend to be a little bit more accommodating. They always want to comply. How can I make you happy? I'll give up what I need in order for our relationship to work, and I want you to be happy at the end of the day. And then your C's, they will withdraw. They don't want to deal with the conflict at all. The conflict's there, see you later, I'm out of the room, and I don't want to deal with this at all. So that's what our C's tend to be. So we need to be able to know what is our personality style, in addition to what our conflict style is, and then know what your conflict styles are of your teams, because that's going to help you be more effective as a leader once you're able to understand how your teams actually deal with conflicts. So let's take a look at what conflict actually means. Conflict means to strike together, as in to flare up, according to Latin. It's a fight or a battle or some form of competition. Another way of looking at it is a personality conflict or a clash. So you break down in communication. And it's very important to deal with this as soon as possible. Here at Legal Aid, have you ever seen a situation where conflict was not actually addressed early, and then what ended up happening?
Well, we were on a committee together, and I didn't agree with his idea, but I just sort of shut down because I didn't want to get into it at the time.
Yeah, so you kind of avoidance strategy in that situation. So was that really helpful for the rest of the team in terms of getting out information?
Not really.
Yeah, exactly, not really. Depending on the issue, sometimes avoidance is not a bad strategy, especially if the issue is very insignificant, it doesn't really matter. You may decide, you know what, to preserve the relationship, I'm not really going to make this a big issue, I'm just going to avoid it and we'll just carry on. Other times when it is a major issue, you really should deal with the actual situation and address the conflict as opposed to just walking away. It's really good for everybody to know that it is okay to have conflict. Conflict can be a good thing. So we want to encourage your team members to have conflict openly, but they want to do it in a way that's respectful, not damaging to the relationships on the team. Because once that happens, then you know your whole team effectiveness is going to derail and you're not going to get the results that you're looking for here at Legal Aid. What I'd like for us to do is an activity with regards to the different personality styles and how you deal with conflict according to the Thomas Kilmann method. So I'm going to divide you up into 5 different groups, and each group I would like for you to think about what are some ways that you can guide your team to successfully work through conflict based on their preferred style, not your preferred style, okay? So this team over here, I'd like for you guys to work on avoid, and I'd like for you guys to work on compete. I'd like for you to work on collaborate, and then compromise and accommodate, okay? So take about 10 minutes, discuss that in your teams, and then we're going to come back and take up the answers, okay? Great. Okay, so time's up. Let's take a look at what your answers were. Let's start with avoid. How would you successfully lead your team members if avoidance tends to be their strategy for dealing with conflict?
Well, I guess I'd want to make them feel a bit comfortable about talking, and just kind of, let them have time to express their feelings.
Absolutely. So here at Legal Aid, could you tell me a situation where you had to deal with somebody who's avoiding their conflict?
Well, I really had a deadline on something and I needed it to get done, and I guess I was being a bit aggressive in getting it done, so that the person I was working with was avoiding me.
Yeah, how'd that work out for you?
Eventually I got it done.
Not so well, but yes. Okay, so good that you eventually did get it done. However, with the avoidance strategy, you want to emphasize to the person who's avoiding that conflict is okay. And sometimes you do need to engage with that particular individual that you have the conflict with in order to resolve the issues. So walking away can sometimes be all right, especially if the issue is very irrelevant and it really doesn't matter, or it's small and you just want to preserve the relationship. That's fine. Avoidance is a great strategy. However, when the issue actually means something, it's really important that you actually address it. So you want to encourage them. And sometimes trust can be one of those factors that causes people to avoid wanting to deal with a situation. So if you as a leader can actually help that individual know that there's a lot of trust in the relationship, they'll be more apt to opening up and letting you know what's going on and what the real issues are. And that way you can come to a great resolution. Excellent, so thank you very much for sharing. Let's take a look at the next one, which is compete. So we know here at Legal Aid, we like to compete, especially when we're in court. So how would you deal with somebody who tends to want to compete when they're dealing with conflict?
I think we would resist the temptation to turn it into a competition.
Yeah, you want to reiterate to them that you don't want to always go into compete mode with everybody, because sometimes that could be very intimidating, especially to somebody who is on the opposite end of the spectrum. If I'm coming in like I want to compete, it's a battle, then the person who's working with me is probably going to back down a bit. And that might be all well and great if I want to win, but I have to remember that in any type of conflict, you have to deal with it respectfully. So I want to make sure that I'm hearing what the other person has to say. So I'm going to encourage my team members that they too need to listen to what other team members have to say and sort of pull the reins back in when it comes to demanding and wanting to compete with their fellow team members. Great, thanks very much, Mayu. And let's look at collaborate, which we tend to do a lot while we are here at Legal Aid. Collaborate, let's come over here. What did you come up with that in terms of strategies?
Well, I guess with collaboration, it's just to learn that, it's okay to have conflicts.
Right.
It's not always, this attacking thing.
Exactly. So sometimes we have situations where we're going to be negotiating settlements at Legal Aid and we're going to be working with each other to come up with an agreement. So we want to make sure that we are collaborative so that it is a win-win situation. With that, it takes time, as you already know. Collaboration is not something that is done very quickly, so you have to keep that in mind and have sort of a balancing act when it comes to collaborating with individuals. So yes, collaborating is a good strategy, and for those who want to always engage in that, sometimes you have to remind them too that they need to be cognizant of the time that's involved in having a collaborative type of agreement, okay? Great, excellent. So let's look at the next one, compromise.
Achieving temporary settlement in a complex situation.
Mm-hmm. So with compromise, that's what you want to do. You want to be able to work together and come up with a win, sort of like a win-lose type of situation. I'll give a little bit, you give a little bit, and then we'll come up to an agreement. Usually we do this when there's a very short period of time. But they have to remember that with compromising, you want to make sure that whatever issues are important to you, whatever means a lot to you, your values, your beliefs, you're not compromising on those things. Because then your team members will feel that you're not really being very assertive. So for that team member that always wants to jump into, let's compromise, I'll give up something, you give up something, they have to know that I'm not going to give up what's really important to me in order just to come up with a quick settlement. Right?
Yep.
Great. So let's look at the last one, which is accommodate. Which group had accommodate? Over here, accommodate. Excellent. So what were the strategies that you would use with them to be successful?
Well, you know, if somebody is all the time in an accommodating mode, then it's quite possible, A, that they may not have really ideas that they can contribute, so they're accommodating other people's ideas, or in order to avoid conflict, they're giving in.
Right.
So accommodating, the way I would, talk to them is that it doesn't always lead to the best solution, because if you are accommodating, that doesn't mean that the idea that you're accommodating is the right one. So there is, there's room for real discussion and, taking another approach to conflict resolution, as opposed to always stepping back and saying, okay, your way is the way we have to go.
Right, exactly. And as you might recall, some of those people who were in the S tend to be a bit more on the accommodating side, because they want harmony, they want balance, they want everybody to get along. So in those situations, you have to remind them that don't compromise on what's really important to you either. And for the relationship to be really rich, you want to make sure that you're getting out your issues too. So encourage them to also look for not a win-lose situation where they're always losing, that they can win too. They just need to work together. So great, you guys all did a really great job. So just to wrap it up, I want us to take a look at a couple of suggestions for leaders to keep in mind when dealing with conflict amongst their teams. They want to always maintain a certain level of neutrality. So whenever one of your team members come to you and they say that they have a conflict, you want to make sure that you're not taking sides despite whatever your method of wanting to deal with the conflict would be. You want to allow each person to have the opportunity to share their perspective. And to do that, you really do need to listen. So as you recall from the communication module and our coaching module, active listening is really key. So you want to make sure that you're doing that when you're dealing with your team members. You want to find areas where everybody can come to an agreement, and you want to remind all the parties the benefits of resolving a conflict. They need to be comfortable with some type of conflict. You don't want to have a team that's like chaos going on, but you want to be okay with a little bit of conflict, because that is healthy. And lastly, make sure that you keep personalities and issues separate. So you're actually addressing what is really wrong and what the conflict is, as opposed to the personality of that particular individual. Okay? Great.